Well, thank you, Jeremy. My name is Becky Schwartz. I am a high school English teacher at Springport Public Schools, which is in Jackson County, kind of in the bottom middle section of the Mitten. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. We are very lucky to get Dr. Troy Hicks to speak for us tonight, and he'll introduce himself in just a minute. But I am one of the co-facilitators or co-webinar hosts for this series, and this is the second of our monthly meetings on breakout rooms. Jeremy, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey everybody, hope everyone's doing well and surviving, whether you're teaching face-to-face or you're teaching both or you're just teaching remotely. Whatever you may be doing, hopefully you're all doing very well. My name is Jeremy Heiler. I teach middle school English and science. Right now I'm teaching 6th grade English and 7th grade science. I am also a NCTE community ambassador, and I also am a KQED media literacy innovator. That's a mouthful. So I presented last time on Hyperdocs, and if you missed that session, you can go back to our recordings that is on our website, and you can check that out. And this one will be here too if you happen to miss it. And we are, like Becky said, we're honored to have Dr. Hicks being able to present for us tonight on using breakout rooms, because we all know that if we're teaching remotely in some sense that those can be useful. And so he's going to show us some really cool ways to use those. So I will turn it over to Dr. Hicks.
All right, thank you both. And I also have the privilege of working with Jeremy, Becky, and a number of other leaders through Chippewa River Writing Project. So it is my honor to be here tonight and to serve in that role. Here is a link to Jeremy's session from last month, available as an archive on our website if you'd like to check that out. And yes, apologies for those who might be having sound issues. We've heard that with the web app that can be slightly problematic because this isn't, WebEx has like 3 systems. They have like trainings and webinars and then the WebEx. So you might want to just try to download the software or join from another device. So we apologize. What I will do though is turn on closed captioning in Google Slides. Also, in a moment, I know that Becky has the short link to the bit.ly. And to help, I will also put in the closed captioning in Google Slides. So with that, we are hoping that soon this will turn into a dialogue and not just me talking at you. And we were joking a little bit when we were planning for this particular session that, yes, there is a very ironic, paradoxical sense that here we are in WebEx where we are not able to break out into breakout rooms as efficiently as we would like to if given other tools. But due to the signups and the registrations and the opportunities that we have through the WebEx system offered through Central Michigan University's subscription to WebEx, we just thought this was the best tool to use for now. So we will not be simulating necessarily breakout rooms in the sense of moving to them, but we will certainly be talking about them, and we'll talk about how you are using them and then how we can potentially use them more effectively. So with that, welcome to our session, using breakout rooms effectively in a writing classroom, engaging our students in building their digital literacies. Before we get fully into our conversation tonight, a few acknowledgements. First, for those of us that are in the mid and central Michigan area, and even in other parts of the Midwest, our land acknowledgement to the Anishinaabe people is appropriate. And so I say that today we are here on the beautiful lands maintained for generations by the Anishinaabe people, the indigenous inhabitants of Michigan, with whom we continue to partner with today here at Central Michigan University. And another acknowledgement that I think is especially important for this moment comes from the National Council of Teachers of English and their statement on anti-racist education, as well as this particular blog post that I find quite compelling. Being an anti-racist educator is a verb. As our nation seems to grapple with acts of hatred more frequently, we as educators must consider our actions. We need to consider where we've spoken and where we've been silent in terms of quelling the growing violence our country faces. These perpetrators were once students. Our teaching must therefore be an act that addresses, challenges, and dismantles racism in all its forms. Anti-racist educators actively confront and challenge racism. And as a leadership team of the Chippewa River Writing Project, this is one of our goals for this year. We are working on our own leadership efforts for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's important to include tonight. And one last acknowledgement, and actually kind of a request, is this. This entire series, as those of you who are here tonight know or watching later know, are being made available to you for free. The teachers who are presenting during the series this year are donating their time, talent, and expertise. And we would appreciate it if you're willing to support the work of the Chippewa River Writing Project, because we are only supported through grants and the professional development contracts that we can gain. If you feel good and feel so inclined and would like to support our work through a donation, giving.cmich.edu is the place where you could offer that gift, and we would greatly appreciate it. So without further ado, we'll jump right in. You've already heard a little bit about me. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the chat room tonight. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to get some of you to take the microphone and share your experiences as we continue to move on. I'm Troy Hicks. I am proud to serve as the director of the Chippewa River Writing Project, officially now in our second decade, and a part of the National Writing Project Network. You can find me pretty much anywhere, hickstro@gmail.com.org, online with Twitter. I'm Hickstro all over the place, and I certainly welcome us to continue this conversation after the webinar this evening, because I am always interested in hearing what's going on in your classrooms, how things are going with and for your students, and what we can learn together to continue to grow as teachers of writing. I'd like to begin with a conversation, and I would invite you to drop a note in the chat room here. I will have just a few moments of radio silence after I ask the question. And the question here cuts to the heart of why we do what we do, whether we're doing it virtually through Zoom or Teams or WebEx or Google Meet, whether we're doing it in our classroom with masks and social distancing, or again in the future at a time where we will not necessarily need masks and social distancing. But what is it that we value specifically about the teaching of writing, and how are we making these values manifest? What do we do to make sure that our students are seeing these values in action in the ways that we structure our teaching and learning experiences, and especially for our conversation tonight, in the ways that we set up breakout rooms? I'm going to give you a few moments. There will be just a bit of radio silence for those that are watching anytime later. I will take probably about 90 seconds to 2 minutes and let you drop a few notes in the chat. And I just want to hear, what is it that you value about the process of teaching writing? Because that will center the rest of our conversation for the evening. And because I don't want to go out of full screen mode quite yet and mess everything up, Jeremy and Becky, if you're seeing anything in the chat room that you'd like to share and verbalize at this moment, that would be wonderful. I'm curious to hear what people are thinking.
Yeah, Megan said that she appreciates having a chance to work with them one-on-one. Annie said, I always want them to know what I value is their thinking, the process of arriving at conclusions through questions, that their stories matter, and that's why writing matters. Alyssa said, I value the opportunity to hear others' ideas and to find new strategies and techniques to improve her writing. Ellen says, I guess what I appreciate most about writing is the fact that students can communicate their ideas to large audiences when they have well-developed writing skills. And then Lori Davis said, I love to see students' voices strengthen.
Nice. And I'm just jotting a few notes because I want to keep these ideas in mind as we're talking tonight. I think that, number one, these are certainly the values we have as a National Writing Project site, as members of the National Council of Teachers of English, and the International Literacy Association, and certainly hearing these ideas about communicating effectively, making sure that voices are raised and strengthened, making sure their stories are heard. That really solidifies exactly the point of why we're having this conversation about breakout rooms. We've all heard about Zoom fatigue. We've all seen the pictures on social media of, individual students sitting in front of a computer like this. And we know that there are challenges. And we know, too, that there's not ubiquitous access yet. Even if every kid in the district got a Chromebook and a Wi-Fi hotspot, that still doesn't guarantee that everybody's going to be on from 8:13 to 9:17 in the morning every morning. But what it does mean is when we are in those times and spaces and we want to use those times effectively, we have to think about how to structure them in order to have their voices raised, to have their voices shared, to communicate with an authentic audience, to get those new ideas flowing and working together. So I'm so glad to hear that in our conversation tonight. And I don't pretend to have all the answers. And in fact, I'm looking to gain some answers and insights from all of you tonight. But I will present what I think are some models for how we can structure breakout room conversations, and then we'll share some resources and ideas together for continuing ways of doing that better. All right, so another kind of piece to foreground our conversation. This comes from the National Council of Teachers of English and their relatively recently revised statement on the definition of 21st century literacies. They talk about the idea that the world demands that a literate person possess and intentionally apply a wide range of skills, competencies, and dispositions. These literacies are interconnected, dynamic, and malleable. And I put this as part of our framing for tonight, too, because I want us to think about these breakout room conversations in a couple different ways. I want to think about the skills of writing, teaching writing and helping students put words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, paragraphs into essays and stories and websites and things like that. But I also want to think about socio-emotional learning, and I want to think about digital literacies. And how can we really make sure that we're using this time effectively to have kids model and mentor and support one another in their writing, while also learning some additional skills for communication and digital literacies as well. And I think that giving kids that space, again, when we have those precious moments of real synchronous time together, how do we, as we've always said, move away from being the sage on the stage and get them communicating and collaborating with one another? So two quick little graphics or infographics of sorts that I think are particularly important for us out and explore many of her books and blog posts and other resources. Callan Tucker earlier in the summer shared just this nice little snapshot of ways to think about asynchronous learning activities. And on the next slide, we'll see some synchronous learning activities. And I share these briefly because I think it's important to think about everything that leads up to groups working together. Some of that could be asynchronous. Some of it could be the quick prep and instructions that you give during a real-time launch of class. And then what could follow? So for instance, like she has this idea of, read and take notes. Well, how could we have students read and annotate a document collaboratively so when they come to our real-time class session, they've got something to talk about? How could we have them watch something and use a tool like VideoAnt or Now Comment to annotate a video and come with something to talk about? Of course, we can use traditional discussion forums and tools like that. We can use social media. We could have them go through a Hyperdoc like Jeremy told us about last month. There are lots of different ways that we can have them get ready for and participate in and then reflect on their group participation time. So some asynchronous strategies that she mentions. And then also her second graphic, I think is particularly important as we think about, especially this idea of building community. making sure that we're really facilitating and structuring and giving purpose to real-time conversation, that we're creating tasks that are genuinely collaborative and not just conveniently cooperative. And that we're also, as best we're able, trying to differentiate and give that real-time feedback, perhaps as we move from room to room, and watching their work emerge in, say, a Google Doc or a Google slide deck or something like that can be really important for us in order to see what the group is doing and how we might move forward from there, all the while keeping track of these ideas. How do we get them to elevate one another's voices? How do we get them to communicate to wider audiences, and so forth? So a few other kind of things just to keep in mind as we get ready. Again, I know that different people are in different situations. Some of you are totally in a remote setting right now. Some of you are in classrooms with students in front of you and other students coming in through video conferencing channels. I know it's different for many of you. And I look forward to hearing some of your thoughts and ideas as we get to the later part of the webinar tonight and thinking about how we can extend and adapt these activities. But moving with that idea of asynchronous and synchronous, and borrowing some language from my colleague and mentor, Renee Hobbs, who has moved to this language in her own instruction and some things I experienced this summer, talking more about anytime learning and real-time learning. Again, how can we create things and experiences ahead of time that get students ready and get them set to go, and then use that as a follow-up. And then in that real time, we maximize that time for learning. How do we get people to really communicate and collaborate and provide encouragement and support and that intellectual lifting that they can do best when they're working together in real time? One other interesting quote that came up, and this was from a post earlier, late spring, early summer. Elizabeth Stone is a professor of English, I believe, at Fordham University. And it was an op-ed type piece that she wrote in response to this idea of Zoom fatigue. And she basically made this case that, you know what, students really do want to be connected, especially right now. And so if we structure the opportunities in our video conference class sessions in productive ways, dialogic ways, meaningful ways for collaboration, they're going to want to be there. Again, this is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all problems. It's not going to solve all connectivity issues. There are students, as we were talking about in our leadership team meeting tonight, that we're not reaching right now. So I don't want to make this out to be some utopia, some panacea. I'm hoping that some of the strategies that we discussed tonight might be ways to get your students to engage while we are in real-time sessions. All right, the other two pieces I want to layer into this puzzle. On the left, we have a three-dimensional graphic of Bloom's taxonomy. This is created by the Iowa State University Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. When you get access to the slides and you click onto that graphic, it will actually take you to the Iowa State Center's website, and you can see the interactive one of these. But I really like this idea of thinking about both the knowledge that we're trying to get students to remember, you know, moving from just facts up to more metacognition, as well as also thinking about the traditional levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So where are we trying, what one of those squares are we trying to hit with any one particular group activity that we might ask? The other graphic, though not nearly as descriptive, the link will take you to a useful place, and that goes to one of the Harvard School of Education projects about socio-emotional learning, where they've mapped socio-emotional learning objectives across a number of different frameworks. And I'm not going to belabor a huge definition of what socio-emotional learning is right now, except to say that we need to be present, and our kids need to be present. They need to be present for one another. They need to use this time that we have when we are in these synchronous sessions to really connect and engage. And so thinking about it from an SEL perspective is really important too. So a couple quick tech tips, and then we're going to jump into some strategies. When Jeremy and Becky and I originally started talking about the session tonight, we were thinking about making it more like, well, here's how you do this in Zoom, and here's how you do this in Teams, and here's how you do it in Meets. And I'm glad I didn't necessarily spend a whole lot of time on that. Number one, because things are always changing. We know they're always changing. Number two, there are a lot of other really smart, thoughtful, caring educators that create blog posts and YouTube tutorials that can do this much better than I can. And if you were to go onto YouTube right now and search for any one of these tools and how to create breakout rooms, you would get all the technical step-by-step directions for doing that. Another reason is because Teams postponed again. I thought I was going to be able to share information about Teams. I know Google Meet has breakout rooms now. And then Zoom just changed their breakout rooms about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where there is an option now for you to help students self-select into rooms. But again, I didn't want to get too far off track and fall into all these technical aspects. I wanted to talk about some teaching. That said, one really useful technique, and I've used this before in workshops, and I think it's worked really well, at least in Zoom. I don't know if there's something quite compatible in, say, Teams or Google Meet or others, but one strategy in Zoom, at least, if it's still enabled by your district, is you can tell students like, hey, we're going to pick from these 4 rooms, and you're going to rename yourself, and you're going to put the number of the room in front of your name, or you're going to say, oh, I want to go to the, Slytherin, or I want to go to Hufflepuff, or, however you're going to name your rooms or something like that. And that can be kind of fun and give them that option. And then when you go to that breakout panel, you can quickly sort them. So all the systems are a little bit different, and I didn't want to get too hung up on the systems, because another thing you can do is to just, find a random name type generator picker tool, because even sometimes you might want to do this separately rather than just trusting what Zoom is going to randomly assign people to or whatnot. There are lots of tools like this. There are many like classroom gradebook tools that will randomize. This happens to come from a free, openly available tool called Flippity. And I've used Flippity during virtual sessions in a number of ways. One would be to go ahead and select the groups. And I do this off screen before I break students out into rooms. And I just generate the list, and I'm like, oh, yep, that looks like those folks haven't worked together. Oh, those 2 are not good. Let me swap that person for that person. And then as they're getting ready to go, I will have that other window open, and then I'll set up the rooms to go. And also when they come back and they report out, you can use the spinner or the single name selector to call on students, so they can participate and know that their name has come up, and they might want to unmute and participate and go from there. So Flippity is just another nice tool to use as part of that process. All right, so here's where we're at. We are going to be talking and thinking about kind of 4 different ways in which we can structure breakout room conversations. And when I was trying to think about and start planning this about a month ago, and I wrote a blog post, I'm like, well, how do we kind of conceptualize this? And I thought, well, what are the normal types of groups we have? There are groups that haven't worked together before, or there are groups that have worked together before. So I started by saying okay, we either have these established groups that are working, they're either, working together on a short period type of thing. They've worked together before and they're jumping in on a quick task, or it's something that they're working on over a sustained period of time within one class session or over a number of class sessions. Additionally, we think about new groups that have never worked together before at all. And how do we help those groups, collaborate and learn to build some norms and expectations and things like that? And how do we, create new groups that might work together for longer durations? Now, the longer duration is slightly maybe misleading. I mean duration, in the sense of one class period duration, 10 plus minutes. I also mean longer duration in the sense of meeting together today and next Wednesday, and then the Tuesday after that, and so on and so forth. And so that can be something that we would want to think about. I'm about to share a note-taking document with my co-presenters here, and I'm hoping one of them will be so kind as to drop the URL in the chat because I don't want to, again, mess up all the video recording and what's going on right now. So Jeremy and Becky, you should have just got a Gmail invite to this document, and it should be editable by anybody. While you're listening to me, I would welcome you all to take notes and to think about what it is that I'm sharing here and how these things might work and how you might extend and adapt and change any of these activities for your own students. And so while we're getting that document in the chat room, getting you all linked into it and sharing your thoughts as you're listening, I want to share just a little bit about the resources I draw from here. Harvard Project Zero, the National School Reform faculty protocols have been immensely influential in how I think about structuring any type of group discussion or collaborative activity. These two resources, number one, are free, which is just amazing, as with many things in education. Number two, they just provide really good models. And I'll show you how I use a couple of these models here. Harvard Project Zero's visible thinking routines have, again, both of these have dozens, so I'm not going to try to use hyperbole here. They just have a lot of great stuff on here. But Harvard Project Zero has usually is kind of structured around like basic questions that can be quickly converted for classroom use. So like you'll see one here in just a moment where we're using the 4Cs activity. I see, I think, I wonder, I used to think, and now I think. A lot of those types of structures are in Harvard Project Zero. So as you're clicking in and thinking about Harvard Project Zero and how you might adapt it to some of these methods. So like, you know, if I'm talking here about established groups and shorter duration, I see you're all in my Google Doc now. And you're like, oh, I'm looking at Harvard Project Zero as Troy is talking, and I think this activity could work really well. I think I wonder could work really well here. Go ahead and feel free to add it and tell me how you might use it. Similarly, the National School Reform faculty, this is the group that's kind of known for the critical friends framework and that kind of professional development structure. They have created a list of protocols that some are behind a paywall. If you become a member, you get access to new protocols, but they have their whole list of original protocols out on their website too. And so they have great activities like Save the Last Word or the Compass Points protocol, different things like that. And then they also have some more highly structured, like discussion type prompts as well. So I'll mention here in a minute, like the 4As, like the assume and argue against, and that one. That's another model that I got from NSRF. So both of these are when I'm thinking about how am I structuring a group conversation for my class tonight, these are my two go-to places. I go in, I find them, and then you'll see kind of how I structure Google Docs. And so, yeah, I see some people are already starting to take notes as you think about these 4 different modes of group work. Feel free to add some notes over here, and we'll definitely have time for you all to talk with some Q&A here at the end of the webinar tonight. All right, with that in mind, new groups, short duration. So this wouldn't necessarily have to be just at the beginning of the school year. It could be anytime you're just kind of mixing groups up randomly or you're trying to get some new groups established. These are what I would consider to be pretty quick activities as well as kind of the goals for doing these activities. So from that kind of academic SEL technology, the goal standpoint here, what are some reasons why I might choose to do something like this? I might give them like a short piece of text and have them quickly try to read through it and engage with it. And the goal is not to go super deep here. The goal is to just start talking with one another, establish some rapport, engage in dialogue, practice good listening behaviors. In terms of the academic level at which I'm hoping to push them, it's usually, you know, relatively low on Bloom's taxonomy. Like this isn't going to move all the way up to like creation and synthesis and evaluation. This is just to get the conversation going, which can then lead to further activities. And from a technical standpoint, like I really like to see them able to work in a shared space. And so I will often use a Google Doc, a Google Slide, a Padlet, a Jamboard, something like that, saying, hey, I know not everybody may be familiar with this tool. Can you try this out? Here it is. Here we go. Let's give it a whirl. So I'm going to share with you on the next slide an example of the 4 Cs. And if you're on the slide deck, you should be able to click on that image and go to a view-only copy of the document. But again, the structures I draw from come from Harvard Project Zero and NSRF. And the idea here is that I've just taken that protocol, but I've turned it into something not quite a Hyperdoc, but Hyperdoc-ish in the sense that students are going to have a landing page. They're going to have something. The groups are together. I want it to be fast. I don't want them tinkering around. I want them to get right to work. So I provide them with the document. I might also do an activity like this in an ongoing shared notes document. For instance, one of the undergraduate classes I'm teaching right now, we're in week 9. Our Google Doc for our shared notes for the whole class of the whole semester is probably like 40 pages long right now, because each week when we do an activity, I'll have them do it just on that one doc rather than having dozens and dozens of smaller docs. So if you'd like to click in and take a look at this, I'll kind of talk you through what I was trying to do with this 4Cs example. And this should be a view-only document. And again, think about how I structured this and how you might take any of the other structures from Harvard Project Zero or from the National School Reform faculty and take this and then adapt it and change it and use it in a slightly different way. So this is the 4Cs, the 4Cs being to make connections, to offer a challenge to the text that you're reading, to pull out key concepts or main ideas from the text, and then to analyze that text and think about what the author wants you to change. So this is a protocol that's especially good for like informational and argument writing. It could be used for narrative writing, but it's especially good probably more for nonfiction. In this case, we would want students to read something, again, quick, here's the link, go read this thing, come back together. And then you see I made the structure in this shared Google Doc where they're going to add some quick notes into that table. And I also will sometimes go so far as to say, you're in a group of 4, everybody's reading the article really quickly, but you all figure out who's going to be the connector, who's going to be the challenger, who's going to identify the key concepts, and who's going to identify the changes. And then when you come back together and you're talking and you're filling out your document together, you can work together because one person's the primary point of contact for that particular C. So again, depending on how long you want to stretch this activity, this could actually turn into a whole class lesson, but the initial brief get students going part of it will probably only be between 5 and 10 minutes, especially if they've already had some contact with the text ahead of time. And so that's one way. I've done similar types of things like this with the 4As protocol. There are a number of other things that you could do in a similar manner. One of the colleagues I've worked with on a different project, teaching primary sources grant, she's a librarian, and she will do the I see, I think, I wonder by having an image on the Google document and then having people fill in their see and what they notice and what they wonder right there. KWLs, T-charts, Venn diagram. I mean, you could think about different ways to set these things up, but also, again, go back to the protocols, go back to the NSRF protocols and the Harvard Project Zero visible thinking routes to kind of mix a little bit, give your students opportunities in, different short bursts. So there are a few ideas. I'm going to pause for just a moment. There's some activity on our Google. Jeremy, Becky, is there anything in the room that we should respond to quickly before moving on?
I don't see anything. Do you, Becky?
I don't. Just a lot of praise for what a good some of these are.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And again, I would more than welcome all of you in the Google document as you're scanning and skimming through the Harvard Project Zero visible thinking routines, and the National School Reform Faculty Protocols. Which ones do you think could be useful, again, for these new groups, shorter duration, quick kind of rapid fire activities? All right, so now let's imagine we're, again, still working with a new group. This could be at the beginning of the semester or the school year. It could be something that you're trying to establish new groups in the middle of the term or for a longer term project or something like that. What are the goals? Similarly to the shorter duration, of course, they're trying to establish rapport, encourage some active dialogue, be active listeners. But this time, I really am I want to push because they're going to have a little more time and they're going to know that, like, hey, you're going to be in breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. I want you to move. I don't say this explicitly, but I want you to move to those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And I will also sometimes give them a new tool that maybe not everybody has experienced, but one that I think they're going to be able to figure out. Or alternatively, here's a tool that you're familiar with, and you're going to use it in a slightly different way than what maybe you've expected to have used it before. And we'll look at that on the next slide with an example using Google Slides. But how do we do that? Jigsaw reading, many probably familiar with that. I like to combine that jigsaw, different people are reading different parts, with another protocol from NSRF called Save the Last Word. In that protocol, somebody shares something, and then all the other members of the group get to respond to what the first person shared. And then the last word is that the original person A gets to respond to what they heard happen in the group. And then person B gets to share, and it goes around the group. And then person B gets the last word, and then person C gets to share, and it goes around the group. So you could take and do something like a Save the Last Word, and you could have them working around a shared technological resource, which is what we'll look at here in just a moment with Google Slides. Compass is always a fun activity, and thinking again, how many use Slides or Jamboard or Padlet or something like that, having them in a cross talk, right? Like all are going to get together in the West and the Norths and the Souths. They're going to be in breakout rooms. And then you might cross-pollinate those breakout rooms too, but they would have that shared document to return to. But again, pushing them through those levels of conversation, like if you look at that Compass Point protocol, it's got lots of prompts to help them think about and articulate what it is that they believe their Compass Point is and why. The probing questions list, you could pick any of those, so any single question, but probably any combination of like 3 or 4 or 5 questions, and say, hey, you're going to be in a breakout room for 15 minutes. Choose 3 or 4 of those questions and have a note taker. Make sure that you're monitoring your airtime. Make sure that everybody's got a little bit of time to talk. Keep your notes over here in our shared Google document. Enjoy that list of probing questions and build from it. So those are all really useful. And again, I'm sure there are others in the visible thinking routines and things like that we could use too. So let me show you kind of what I was imagining, like what you might be able to do with a jigsaw type of thing. So I just took a quick screenshot, courtesy of Google Books, of the prologue from The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and kind of combining like I see, I think, I wonder, with like a jigsaw reading type thing here. So students could either with their phones, quite literally taking a snapshot of the text that they're reading, or screenshot off their ebook or the website they're reading. On a Google slide, they could pull that screenshot in. I just put 2 blue underlines there. You could have them draw boxes. You could do different things like that. And then using the little shapes or thought balloons or something like that, kids could annotate and describe, here's what I see, here's what I think, here's what I wonder. Each one of the kids makes one chunk. So let's say, student number 1 is reading pages 1 and 2 of the prologue. Student 2 is reading pages 3 and 4. Student 3 is reading pages 5 and 6, etc. All in a shared Google slide deck. They're all building out their slides, and you give them just the one template, and then they can keep working. And then, as the original authors put all this stuff in, And then the other students can come in and add additional notes. They could add it in the underneath spot on the Google slide. They could add it in a text box on the slide. They could actually do something and use the commenting feature. Lots of different ways. So they're listening to person A describe, oh, I read the prologue and I was thinking about this and I wondered about that. They could be collaboratively annotating that Google slide deck. Similarly with Padlet, you could have them do that using the commenting feature. Lots of different ways that you could have them kind of capture that thinking. And I see there's some notes over here about how ways that people are using some Google Slides to do that. Yep, bringing in answers from an assignment. Again, yeah, they could bring in, hey, here's how I solved the math problem last night. Upload that on a Google Slide and then have to talk about it. Doesn't always have to be everything about writing. It could be other content too. Other things showing up in the chat room there, Jeremy, Becky, things that you're noticing.
Annie,
go ahead, Becky. No, go ahead, Becky. You're fine.
Okay, Annie had kind of a question. She asked, is anybody using Google Breakout Rooms? Right now, I start meets, not breakout rooms, on 3 different devices to have, say, 6 groups of 4 students each. Having that many meets open can slow down one computer, so I need more than one device. I know that Google came out with their breakout rooms, but...
Good question. I do not have experience using Google Meets in that way. Have either of you used that?
I have not. We have Google Meets, but I have not used the breakout rooms because of the fact that our hybrid students are very small. So I have like 3 students in remote learning compared to the face-to-face. So those 3 students typically just work together that are online. Or what I do is I've created, I have a colleague that's created, I haven't done it, but I have a colleague that's created like breakout room codes, and they give them to the students to do on their own devices. And that way they could work with those students. And I know that's been helpful.
Yeah. In fact, there was somebody that had a great blog post and like YouTube video earlier, right at the beginning of pandemic pedagogy, that showed a way to do this. Yeah, I'm not finding it right now, but I know there are. Yeah, there's a YouTube video. There are people that have figured out how to do this, and so I would definitely encourage you to do kind of a Google Meets breakout room hack. Some people have been figuring out some different ways to do this. Okay. All right. So those are some strategies for thinking about that kind of interaction with those new groups. I want to quickly share a couple other activities that I would imagine these are groups that have worked together for a while, but you're trying to continue to get them brainstorming and thinking and trying to problem solve in new and different ways. A couple things, and I didn't put links to all of this here, but there are so many. I mean, you can just search for icebreakers, and Gamestorming is more of a businessy type of site, but Gamestorming has some interesting activities you might be able to pick from. But again, this is, what do we want students to do here? They've been working together for a while. We really want them to push one another's thinking, to start to come up with those ways of talking with one another in a constructive and yet still potentially a little bit critical way, to push one another and to move more substantively into the work. We want them to get to work quickly, and we want them to think about working across different shared spaces. Some different structures and protocols that you might use. The barriers and bridges from NSRF is a good one to get them thinking creatively about how one person might look at something as a barrier and someone else might look at it as a bridge. The Connect Extend Challenge type of series of questions. How can you connect to something and extend their thinking, but then also push back on them as well? And then I like this creating metaphors activity. And what I wanted to show here, and this is not a link, this was just a quick snapshot that I made of a Jamboard here. Like, you could have students engage in that creating metaphors as a writing prompt. You could also then have them import an image or something like that, like I did here. I was trying to metaphorically compare my writing process to a sunrise. And then I brought in this image of a sunrise. And you can have the student create their initial metaphor and then have other students layer on the sticky notes where they're saying, oh, I think this is interesting because, or I wonder if. So again, trying to give them that little bit of pushback. But also, I like Jamboard. I've done it for another type of activity where we didn't want the students to feel like they were absolutely confined in terms of all, like it felt like in a Google Doc or a Google slide, like people want to make things nice and linear and like that. And we wanted them to like be able to shift things around and twist them and move them because part of the activity was like looking at things from a different angle. And so, again, using a tool like Jamboard, having that established group come back and rethink something in a different way and maybe summarize, maybe ask questions. They could import a snapshot of their current project that they're working on, and then they could use the post-it notes to jam, to think about different ideas. They could use the pens, all those kinds of different things. So Jamboard is kind of an interesting tool. And again, I think it could be used in quick fire activities for new groups, but also get established groups to think differently and in new ways. All right. And then again, if we have groups that are working for longer periods of time, they've been working together already, and they need some new ideas or something like that. How do we get them working and responding to one another? And even thinking about how we do this with a peer response group. And I should put in those peer conversation stems. Let me find those really quickly. And I'll let Becky or Jeremy drop them in the Google Drive, or drop the Google Drive link in the chat. But this is where, either in like a formal writing group or even a lit circle or whatever project they're working on over time, like sometimes they just need to step back and be metacognitive about it. Like, how do we get them to ensure that they're really giving that thoughtful feedback? Or that they're thinking about questions in a new way, or they're coming at their work and giving each other some really useful feedback. So, all right, let me see if I can share this with both of you. Sorry about that. And then one of you can maybe drop it in the chat real quick. So these peer conversation stems are really helpful for established groups that are looking to talk to each other in different ways. But the question formulation technique in particular, I borrow these slides from another colleague that I work with in the summer, Amanda Murphy, who is a teacher out east and part of that Digital Literacy Institute with Renee Hobbs. She took the Right Question Institute's question formulation technique and she built it into this Google slide deck. And so you have this slide available to you and you can make multiple copies of it. And you'll want to do a little looking about the Right Question Institute's question formulation technique strategy. Basically what happens is you give students a focus question, like you all agree on the big topic, and then they start generating a list of questions. And after they've generated a list of questions for a few minutes, they then have to decide by dragging over the O's or the C's which ones are open-ended questions and which ones are closed-ended questions. Then what Amanda had us do is down below, like in the notes section of the slide, you had to like reframe like 2 open-ended questions as closed questions and 2 closed questions as open questions. And then you had to, out of all your list of questions, pick and prioritize and choose like, okay, what are the top 3 questions that we have? So again, this could be something that you use at the beginning of a big project. It could help them come at a project they've been working on with a new set of eyes. And this Google slide is a template that you could copy and give out. There's some great videos on the teaching channel about how to use the question formulation technique, as well as the Right Question Institute website. So go check those out too. All right, so I do want to leave a little time for Q&A and interaction here at the end, so I'm going to be very brief. Just a few other really good blog posts and guides from different teaching and learning centers about how to engage in active learning, which I know again, ironically, is not what I've really done during the webinar tonight in terms of getting you all in breakout rooms and doing these active learning strategies. Yet, hopefully you'll go to some of these sites and find out a little bit more about some of the different things that you can do. Also, Mahabali has a great blog post about how we set our expectations for student participation with webcams on. Like, we can still have them engaged and active, and we don't always have to have their webcams on. There are times where that's okay, and maybe perhaps even better, they might be more willing to participate. So that's a great blog post to check out for some of her perspective. She's one of the authors for hybrid pedagogy and does a lot with open education resources. All right, with that in mind, I was going to say, let's take a few minutes to write about how you might use any of these strategies, which you are more than welcome to do in our shared Google Doc. But I will also just put up these closing questions and then open it up to see if anyone else would like to take the microphone and ask some questions as part of the webinar too.
Troy,
Yes.
Annie had a question about slide 24. She was asking, how did you add an entire text onto that slide? She said she can Google it, but she said she needs prior knowledge to even Google it.
Oh, so that I went to Google Books and I took a screenshot of this first page that came up in Google Books. Of course, if I had the book in front of me, I could take my phone and snapshot it that way. So, Google Books or Amazon you could do. And then also you could take snapshots. Depending on the device you're on, like on Windows, I think it's called the snipping tool, if that sounds right.
Yes.
On the Mac, you do like Command-Shift-4. On mobile devices, there are ways like you press a certain combination of buttons. So there's lots of tutorials about how to take those screenshots. But yeah, that was basically a screenshot just straight out of Google Books.
And Alyssa had made a comment. She said that they have been told in their district that the kids don't have to turn on their cameras unless there is a need to do that one-on-one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what I found? And again, I know my sample size is very different. I'm teaching only one undergraduate class right now that was supposed to be a face-to-face. It went online. I would say on any given moment, if you were to pop into my Zoom room, only 2 or 3 of them would have their cameras on. But then as soon as I put them into breakout rooms and I hop from breakout room to breakout room, I would say 3/4 to 4/5 of them have their cameras on when they're talking with one another. I'm not sure what it is. I don't belabor it too much. If I absolutely have something where, like, hey, I'm going to take a screenshot of us together today, or we have a guest that's coming in to do a quick guest lecture today, please have your cameras on. I'll make it a little bit of a point on those days, but I don't make it too much of a point on the days when it's just me, because I move them into breakout rooms and they start working together pretty quickly. So, okay. Well, a couple of things I would just kind of leave you with then are thinking about these questions, as with all good teaching, like what are we doing to prepare for? What are we doing to structure and facilitate during the time of? And then how are we helping students reflect on any given experience? So whether it's a quick, short, little group activity burst. Oh, you're all going to go do I See, I Think, I Wonder. Well, tell them why. What is it that you want them to read before they get to the breakout room? What do you want them to do in the breakout room? How do you want them to act and interact with one another? And then after you come back, like in a whole group, like I could say, oh, okay, now, Troy put this comment right, or he put his response there. Jeremy, can you give Troy some feedback right there? And then, okay, this is Jeremy's comment. And then Becky, can you put a comment on Jeremy's? So again, just making the work valuable, right? Like if you're going to send them to breakout rooms and you're using that very precious time that you have, make sure that they recognize that the work is worthwhile. It wasn't just kind of busy work. It was something that's going to contribute to a broader class conversation and dialogue. And then also, and we didn't talk anything about these tools tonight, though I could certainly see some ways you might use these in breakout rooms or to prepare for breakout rooms. Tools like Nearpod or Pear Deck for those kind of formative assessments and pieces, like, or even, those quiz type tools like Kahoot or Quizzes or something like that. You could have students go and say, here's a juicy question. Like, here it is, it's on screen, go to your breakout room for a few minutes. All right, come back, now input your answer, whether it's a multiple choice answer or a short answer or something like that, or put the plates on the map or whatever tool you want. You can actually push them into breakout rooms really quickly, have a quick discussion, just like we would during trivia night, right? And then come back together, and then they get to submit their answer that way as well. So I think you can use breakout rooms for a variety of structures. And then I haven't really talked overtly about this, but certainly being a writing teacher, having kids give feedback to one another's writing. So how can you create like a shared Google Doc or a drive or a space where they have, hey, make sure your link is available, make sure your document is accessible, make sure that everybody is going to be able to get to it so they can put comments on it really quickly. Those types of things are particularly valuable as well. All right. Any other questions popping up in the chat there as we kind of come to a close?
Kind of the big one that was asked, Troy, was Amy Ford had said, research shows that power dynamics from beyond the classroom get reproduced within the classroom and in group work. And she's asking, how do you structure participation within groups to disrupt those patterns? Mm-hmm. He says, in face-to-face, you can pause students and give them directions easily and incrementally, but in breakout groups, you would have to use chat or jump into the groups.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. Again, it's that idea of helping them become metacognitive, not only about the academic task, but about the SEL and the ways they're interacting with others. So first of all, just make it clear, like share some of the research, share some ideas, like, okay, if you're concerned that, in whatever case, this gender is speaking out more than this gender, or this racial group is speaking out more than that racial group, or this age is speaking out more than that age, or this level of someone who feels they're more proficient as a writer is speaking out more than the people who are less proficient. Make sure that the students are aware of that. In a tool like Google Docs, like you can make sure you're logged in. Every once in a while, I want you to go in and like make sure the version history is tracking, like put track changes on so I can see who's adding and who's contributing. Have someone monitoring airtime, which I know is kind of an interesting crossover to the potential presidential debate coming up and what they're going to do with microphones. But just that idea that one person in the room is kind of gently nudging and encouraging people to participate. And then also, if someone doesn't necessarily want to participate, just give them that acknowledgement. Oh, so-and-so, did you have something you want to add? No, thank you, I'm all right. And that person too can, that's kind of a shared responsibility. Like, no, I'm good. Like, I'm telling you right now, like, I honestly, you've all said it. It's okay. I don't feel like I've been stepped over or ignored. So teaching them those group dynamics, I think, is really important. But then, yeah, using the tools like in Google Docs to like explicitly track the contributions of every group member, I think is really important. And you can have them reflect too, and afterwards, like share a quick response on Flipgrid or something like that. Like, how did the group go? Having them do like a quick Google form or survey to report out on their group and group participation and dynamics. I think that could be important as well.
And not to float my own boat, but if you think about hyperdocs could be really helpful in that situation too, is what Dr. Hicks is kind of saying.
Yeah, they could. Well, giving them that shared common workspace. Absolutely. All right. Well, I will reiterate just one more time that, again, we're offering the webinar series this fall and next winter and spring. freely available to all our colleagues because we enjoy working with you and learning with and from you. If you do find the work of the Writing Project valuable, we would kindly appreciate your support so we can continue to help teacher leaders like Jeremy and Becky and others who are presenting during the webinar series this year with their own professional growth and learning so they can bring that learning to all of you. And with that, again, I think you probably know this by now, but I'm Hickstro, again, pretty much everywhere if you need to get in touch with me. And I thank Jeremy and Becky for being good hosts and making this webinar series happen. And I think we'll stick around for just a few minutes after the recording is done, and we'll try to make the archive available as soon as possible. So thank you, everyone, for a great evening.
Thank you.